Every day, it seems, you hear about another one. Another teacher, often married, charged with essaying a student. A teacher, someone parents trust, someone kids are told to listen to. Charged, about to be prosecuted for doing unspeakable things. Oh, but the part I left out? It wasn't just a teacher, it was a female teacher. It's something I've been tracking since October of 2024. Every single day in those 18 months or so, I have found a story about another woman charged with committing unspeakable crimes against men, young boys, and yes, even young girls. Every day it's the same. Another headline, another case. This isn't some once-in-a-while story anymore. It keeps popping up. Different state, different country, different school or hospital, but always the same kind of situation. And at some point, you just have to take a step back and stop saying, that's crazy. And instead start asking, why does this keep happening? Why is no one talking about it? Why is no one doing anything about it? As I said, I've been tracking this for about 18 months now, and for context, I want to share some of the more recent cases that I've been tracking. Not to sensationalize them, but to show how common it is. For example, early last month, Alicia Crins, a 39-year-old physical education teacher in Rhode Island, was charged with 2 counts of third-degree essay involving a male student. According to reports, she contacted the student outside of school, communicated with him, and crossed boundaries that led to criminal charges. He was 17, still technically a minor. But here's the part that doesn't get enough attention. He didn't report it right away. He reported it later. Why? And this is important to understand because it applies just as much for boys as it does girls. Because in situations like that, it doesn't always hit you in the moment, especially when it's an authority figure, especially when you're young, and especially when you don't fully understand what's happening or how to process it. Now, if that were the only case that I found, fine. You could call it an isolated incident, which sadly many do when I point out what's going on. It's just one bad situation, they'll say, so let's just move on. But that's not what we're seeing. Oh no. As I said, it's now a daily occurrence. And again, I want to add some context to what I'm saying by just looking at the past month. In fact, just the past week as I'm filming this on the last day of April 2026, where there hasn't been a single day, not one, that I didn't find another case of a woman, often a teacher, accused of committing these crimes, most often against underage boys. Let me say this again. Not a single day in the past month, as I'm filming, that there wasn't another case found. But it's not just 1 month. As I said, I started tracking this a 1.5 years ago, and in that entire time, not one day has gone by without at least one report. One can only imagine how far back it goes, because if anyone actually took the time to do so, I'm pretty confident it goes back years, perhaps even decades. Again, I don't point this out lightly or to create sensation, but to illustrate just how huge this problem is. For example, again, as I'm filming on April 30th in Florida, a teacher, one Heather Mashburn Smith, who is 37 years old, has admitted to repeated encounters with a student on school grounds. Let me repeat that. Not allegedly, not was charged with, but admitted. In Michigan, there was another case involving a 27-year-old prep school teacher named Jocelyn Sanderman, who was charged and eventually convicted of having relations with a 16-year-old. She's now been sentenced to 4 to 15 years in prison. Then there's a case in Northside, Texas, involving a 46-year-old elementary school employee, one Cecilia Mueller, who was arrested for SA in a case involving a 5th grade student. And finally, in New Jersey, prosecutors have charged a former middle school teacher, one Ashley Fissler, who is 36, with, and I love the way it was phrased, to hide what she did, maintaining inappropriate contact with a student over a period of years. That's just 4 cases of the over 24 I could have cited in just the past month. 4 different states, different schools, different ages, yet all the same category of misconduct. And here's the other side of the coin. This is likely just the tip of the iceberg, a fraction of what's actually going on out there. Because those are just the ones that made the news. Those are just the ones where charges were actually filed. They're the visible layer. But there's a whole bunch more that isn't visible. Because the fact of the matter is, when the victim is a boy or young man, well, let's just say the reaction isn't the same as when it's a young girl or even an older woman. You've seen it, you've heard it. People laugh, people joke, people downplay it. People say they wish that it had happened to them. I mean, you get comments from idiotic men all the time who say, man, I wish that happened to me. Well, trust me, bro, you don't. And I know, because I was a victim at the age of 13 myself, a victim at the hands of a 35-year-old woman. So don't sit there and tell me it was no big deal. Don't tell me that I wanted it. And don't tell me that you wish it had happened to you. Because trust me, while I have survived it better than most, it's still something I deal with on a daily basis almost 50 years later. I wouldn't wish what happened to me on anyone, and neither should you, especially yourself. And I hope you all take a moment to think about how backwards that mindset is. We're talking about minors, kids, being put in a situation with an adult in a position of authority. And somehow it's being turned into a punchline, a joke. Them being told you wanted it, or I wish I was you. That matters a lot more than you think, because that kind of reaction doesn't just exist online. It shapes how people respond in real life. It shapes whether someone speaks up. It shapes whether the police, DAs, and judges will pursue the case or not. Because if a boy thinks he's going to be laughed at or dismissed or not taken seriously, which the overwhelming majority of the time is exactly what will happen, well, then he's a lot less likely to report anything. Which means the cases we're seeing, the ones, as I said, we're seeing on quite literally a daily basis, are not the full picture. Not even close. No, they're the cases that made it through all of that, which sadly isn't many. Now, let's take a step back even further. Let's walk into the minefield. Today, male teachers make up roughly 20 to 25% of the K-12 workforce. That's a major shift that has been occurring over time. Fewer men in classrooms, fewer men in schools, and more female-dominated environments. All while at the same time we're hearing of more and more cases of crimes being committed against minors by female teachers and staff members. Is there a connection between that shift and what we're seeing in these cases? We honestly don't know. But at the very least, it's one hell of a coincidence, isn't it? And this is why this is such a real issue, because no one's really asking the question about why this is happening. No one is calling out the epidemic of female teachers and faculty members accosting their students. There's no widespread discussion about it. Hell, no discussion at all. To the best of my knowledge, there hasn't been a single serious breakdown of how often this is happening or a study done to see how prevalent it is. There's no deep dive into the patterns, prevention, or oversight. There's no nothing. It's just headline after headline and move on. Day after day, week after week, year after year. Let that sink in and ask yourself, why? The double standard is obvious. Just look what happens when it's a male teacher and a female student. Then there's calls immediately for the wood chipper. But when it's a female teacher doing it, silence. Do you think for a second nothing would be done if on a daily basis male teacher after male teacher were being caught? Do you think it would just be ignored or, dare I say, swept under the rug? Of course not, nor should it be. But while we're quick to condemn men, all men, for the actions of a very few, we're just as quick to condone women committing these crimes by refusing to hold them accountable. And yes, you heard me right. I said condone. Because by refusing to hold these women truly accountable, by refusing to acknowledge that there is a huge problem that exists, an actual epidemic of sexual violence being committed by female teachers and staff across our schools, we are in effect condoning and excusing their behavior. When something shows up repeatedly across different places and no one steps back to look at it as a whole, that's a problem. Because at that point, you're not dealing with one situation. You're dealing with a systemic pattern that isn't being examined. And when patterns don't get examined, they don't get addressed. And when they don't get addressed, they continue. And victims continue to pile up and suffer, which is exactly what has been going on and is going on. Now, let's be clear about something. This isn't about attacking women. This isn't actually about turning it into some sort of gender war. In fact, it's quite the opposite. We're trying to counter the gender war that has existed. No, this is about consistency. It's about accountability. It's about justice for the victims. All victims. Men, women, boys, girls. It's about protecting others from those that commit these horrific crimes. That is not a gender issue. It's a human one. And as I said earlier, if the situation were reversed, if these headlines involved male teachers and female students at this frequency, we wouldn't even be having a debate about whether it's a serious problem. We'd already be in a full-blown national conversation mode. There'd be policy discussions, media coverage, public outrage, congressional inquiries. And yet, here we are, sitting in silence. Scattered coverage at best and minimal follow-up. Quite literally, nothing is being done about the issue because it's not even seriously being discussed. And that's criminal. We now have an entire society of people acting like it's not that big of a deal. And that inconsistency matters because the standard should be simple. If an adult, no matter what their sex, is in a position of authority and crosses the line with a minor, it should be considered serious every single time. No exceptions, no jokes, no minimizing it. Because what happens in those situations doesn't just stay in the moment. It carries forward for years. It affects how someone sees trust, how they see relationships, how they understand boundaries. And when it's dismissed or worse, laughed off, that adds another layer because now it's not just the experience itself. It's the reaction to it, or in many cases, the lack of reaction. So when multiple cases show up within a short period of time, it's reasonable to ask questions, not jump to conclusions, not make claims beyond what's proven, but simply ask questions. And yet, we don't. We don't look at the cases. We don't look at the frequency. We don't look at the response. We don't ask, why isn't there any more attention being put on it? Because ignoring something is not going to make it go away. It just delays dealing with it. And when it comes to situations involving minors, delay isn't a great strategy. The bottom line is this. The fact is these crimes are horrific. And until we stop inserting gender into them and address them for what they are, nothing will change. How many boys are struggling? How many boys have unalived themselves? How many men are being forced to live their lives with what was done to them? We argue for the female victims. We demand they be heard. We demand they get justice, and rightfully so. But when it comes to the male victims, when it comes to the boys, all we demand is silence.